And I'll invite Fire Chief Steve Coleman. He is here on fire safety issues, and this is in part what I requested because I've had a phone call about how this is handled, and I'll turn it over to the Fire Chief to let him explain the procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, I have three specific issues that I just want to address tonight very quickly, seasonal issues. And then I know the chairman had a question, so when I'm done with these three issues, if you want to ask a pointed question, that might be easier just to make sure that I cover exactly what is covered. But the three things that I wanted to talk about tonight fairly quickly, because we've seen a little bit of an uptick in it in the last 2 to 3 weeks as we roll into the winter season. The first is just a reminder to the residents and the business community, and we're very fortunate here that we do a lot of public outreach. We speak to the Chamber of Commerce. They do a great job of pushing information out to the business community. Between our social media, working with the schools, the school superintendent also pushes out email blasts through the school department relative to hydrant shoveling. We have very good compliance, I guess, if you will, but the residents of the community, the business community, they do take shoveling hydrants after a storm seriously. I did some driving around at the end of last week just to check some neighborhoods, and we were in pretty good shape. So I just want to thank the business community and the residents for that, but it's never ending. Every time it snows, we ask for the public's help to what we call adopt a hydrant, in their neighborhood, and we have a lot of participation from children, which is nice. This last snowstorm, I probably received 20 or 21 photographs either through our social media or emailed to me of kids posing with their shovels next to the hydrant, demonstrating their work, and that was awesome and great to see. So again, just a reminder that after a storm, we have over 500 hydrants in town, and we can't do it all. Within the days after a storm, when we go out on emergency calls, we're on a particular street, we look at the hydrants, we'll shovel out what needs to be done, but we can't do it within that first 24 to 48 hours without the residents' help. But fortunately, over the years, they've stepped up and done a very good job with that. The next thing that I just want to talk about is we've had an uptick lately over the last couple of weeks in the amount of carbon monoxide responses that we do. Just want to remind the residents that Massachusetts general law requires a carbon monoxide detector in your home, providing you have a fossil fuel burning appliance. So if you have an oil burner, or if you have natural gas or propane, if you have some sort of a fossil fuel burning appliance that heats your home, law requires that you have a carbon monoxide detector on each level of the home where there's living space. So if you have electric heat, and that's the only source of heat that you have, and there's no other appliances, it's not required. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good idea, but the law is really driven around fuel-burning appliances, and that would include any sort of a fireplace or a wood stove. We've responded almost on a daily basis over the last couple of weeks. As a matter of fact, within the hour before I came here tonight, they may even still be there. One of the engine companies was working a carbon monoxide call within the hour. Many of them have revolved around their oil burners malfunctioning because they hadn't been serviced in a while. So it's a good reminder to the residents as well to, on an annual basis, you should contact a professional to come out, take a look at your oil burning equipment, just make sure that it's running in good order, that it's cleaned, the filters on the oil tank are changed. There is a process in order to make sure that equipment is running efficiently. The majority of the problems that we see carbon monoxide related, especially secondary to a fuel burning source, is again, like I said, the equipment had not been tested or cleaned in many years, and it's running at a very low efficiency rate, which promotes the carbon monoxide within the resident. If you have a carbon monoxide detector and it goes off, that is an emergency. Don't hesitate, dial 911. leave the residence, but when you leave the residence, make sure that you close doors and windows. This time of year, most people don't have their windows open. But in order for us to get there and monitor the area with a meter and try to isolate where the problem is, it's impossible for us to do if you leave a door or, open the window. The carbon monoxide essentially almost immediately escapes, and it makes it very, very difficult. So make sure the house is buttoned up, leave. We'll be there in a couple of minutes, and we'll be able to monitor the house and hopefully point you in a direction of where the carbon monoxide is coming from. And the last thing that I want to touch on, which I can't even believe that I'm talking about this before Christmas, but it does see, it's for whatever reason, we've had a couple of calls and it seems to be an issue earlier, is that of ice and ice safety. We responded to a call last night over in the Leicester Street area for a resident thought that they saw some four-wheelers out on the ice and they thought that they went through the ice. Fortunately, it appears that they were just kind of riding along the shore, but we did see signs of footsteps that were on the ice, and the ice in no way, shape, or form is safe at this point. I mean, it's been raining all day, so whatever ice maybe did form in the, as far as an inch or an inch and a half, that's all but evaporated today. So we, the town, the fire rescue department, our position is that no ice is ever safe. There's so many factors that go into making ice safe, whether or not there are currents running through that lake or pond. You could have areas that have 1.5 feet thickness in one area and 4 inches of thickness 15 feet away. There's really no rhyme or reason. Nature decides that in terms of ice thickness. So, we're fortunate in this community that we do have some safe options with the skating arena, but we know it is inevitable that people are going to be out on the ice. We just ask you to, use extreme caution, make sure that you take proper steps before going on the ice. But even though we've had some cold temperatures, that in no way has made safe ice conditions up to this point. So those were the three things that we've been, again, sort of had an uptick not only in questions but in actual response over the last couple of weeks that I wanted to address. But I'd certainly entertain any questions from the board and see if I can answer any more questions you may have.
Mrs. Goodrich.
Thank you. If I can just ask a follow-up question and then another issue. On the carbon monoxide, I know that, and from personal experience actually, in my family, at what level does it detect it? Because I know you lose your cognitive ability to say, like, something's wrong here, I need to react. Do those carbon monoxide detectors measure it at a level that you're still able to make a decision? Yeah,
that's a great question. And carbon monoxide technology has changed over the last decade. Carbon monoxide detectors of, let's say, 10 years ago, which I'm sure many residents maybe still have a carbon monoxide detector that's 10 or 15 years old. The reality is that anything that's over 10 years old, both for smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, should be replaced because there's sensors inside of those that just over time they wear down. But the old technology of carbon monoxide, it used to build cumulatively. So you could have lower levels of carbon monoxide. I mean, this carbon monoxide in this room right now, we're all living with it in some way, but it would basically build over time, and then once it sensed a dangerous level, then it would activate. That technology has changed today where it goes off on much lower levels than it did a long time ago. So we consider anything to be over 10 parts per million because, again, carbon monoxide is cumulative. So anything 10 parts per million or higher we consider to be dangerous because the longer that you're in that environment, even in a 10 part per million area, over that 8 or 9 hour period, your levels of carbon monoxide are going to be much higher because you've stayed in that environment. So detectors now go off, we may go into a home and we're detecting maybe 5 or 6 parts per million. So the technology is very good where it is allowing you to kind of make decisions without your cognitive behavior being affected. So it goes off on very low levels. So you recommend that if anyone has detectors that are 10 years old, that Yes,
or older
if you
to
have some,
replace them?
again, Mass General Law requires that anything over 10 years, if we were to inspect that upon inspection, it would actually fail the inspection because they can't have a manufactured date
It's
of over 10.
something you don't think of, you just know
Yeah,
that it's
exactly.
there.
Yep.
And the other, unfortunately, in the winter, there are so many safety concerns, but I did see it on the news. One that you didn't touch on, which I think you should take the opportunity here, is snow blower safety.
Yes, you're right, and actually, we had one of the first incidents in the state. So we do a couple of snowblower emergencies a year, at least. The very first snowstorm that we had on that Monday, we responded to a snowblower emergency. Again, I think one of the things that in my conversations with the public when we talk about snowblowers, I think I think everybody gets that when it's moving, you don't stick your hand or your foot in it, right? I think everybody gets that. What a lot of people don't understand is that even when you shut the snowblower off and the engine is not running and the auger is not spinning, there is still tension built in that auger. So even if you were to touch that, it may be enough to just sort of spin that auger back in the opposite direction to relieve any tension that it has in the blade. And typically, that's where we see the injuries. I can't remember a time in my career that someone said, oh, it was running and I stuck my hand in there. It's always that tension issue. So what you should do is, if you have a clog in your snowblower, shut it off, and then get some sort of a stick or a broom. A hockey stick works good, and use that device to manipulate cleaning the chute and freeing the clog. Even if you think there's no tension in it, it's not worth it. It's, again, they're machines, they're unpredictable. But unfortunately, we did have a resident that, that suffered some severe injuries from that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. One of the reasons this is all came up tonight was I had a phone call from a person that's on hospice, and their concern is, how do they get out? How do you get in to help them after a snowstorm? They have neighbors that will help them clean out at some point when it's all done snowing. But if that happens to come in the middle of a snowstorm or right after a snowstorm at any point, and nobody's been able to get there, have you any procedures, anything in place to help those people so they can get in, or so you can get in, or they can get out if there's a problem?
Yes. So that's a great question. And the short answer is yes, we will get there. We will get in. And this is, a unique situation where, we have a resident that's on hospice. But even residents that, have no illness, we all know when it's snowing, especially during, larger snowstorms, it's tough to keep up on that. Even people that are out there actively shoveling and snow blowing, depending on how much snow we're going to get, access can always be a concern, even with able-bodied residents. So yes, within the fire rescue department, we have response procedures that our department, we have a pickup truck with a plow, and during snowstorms, we actually staff that plow because that keeps both fire stations open. We don't, although the DPW is excellent, post-storm to come with the loaders and kind of clean up the intersections and salt the parking lot, the DPW has their hands full during a storm. So both the fire department and the police department, historically, we've always taken care of our own lots. So we go back and forth between the stations, making sure that our access is good. But during a storm, when we have an emergency, whether it's a fire emergency or a medical emergency, and again, it depends on conditions, but if it's an active snowstorm, that plow will go on the emergency call, just in the event that we would have to gain access. Now, again, depending on how much snow and foot, I'm hoping we don't see it this year, but there have been years in past where, we've had a couple of feet of snow, that's dropping, and, although our plow can do some work, the DPW in those cases, they are on the air. So we don't hesitate to even call the DPW in some circumstances and say, hey, we need you to divert somebody over to this street because we need a larger piece of equipment to just get us down this road right now. now. Typically we're able to do it, but it's not uncommon, it's not uncommon for us to, open up the end of a driveway. All of our engines and ambulances during this time of year, we have snow shovels on them. It's not uncommon that for the first 24 to 48 hours, especially with our elderly residents, that we wind up shoveling our way in. Because again, it's a safety issue for us. If we can't get safe access upstairs, then we're not going to be able to extricate a patient safely out. So it is not uncommon that within the first 24 to 48 hours that we are usually the ones on an emergency that wind up shoveling walkways, shoveling stairs, and gaining access, at least to some extent, into a driveway. So I certainly don't want, especially the elderly residents or those who may have an illness like this resident that contacted you on hospice. I don't want anybody to fear that we're not going to get there. We will get there, and we will get in.
Just as a follow, we will. That means the fire department.
Correct.
Because you are speaking as the fire chief. Do you have, are the DPW, can you call them, are they readily available?
Oh, yes.
So that if you can get tied up someplace, you could be on one side of town or another couple of streets over, and you got two calls come in back to back.
Yep.
You can get a hold of the DPW and let them know that I need some help just to open up or access a...
Yeah, absolutely. So all the DPW vehicles have mobile radios in them. Many of the supervisors, including the DPW director, they have, some of them have portable radios. I know the DPW director, he monitors both the police and fire frequencies. So the fire department has the ability to call DPW and vice versa. So we have interoperability, and that happens usually once a storm. Many times the DPW will run into an emergency themselves. They'll on-site a car accident, or they'll on-site, they'll jump on the fire frequency to call fire alarm and make notification. So we have very good interoperability.
Understand, I knew the answer to that.
Yep.
Just from my years at the firehouse, but I wanted to be sure that you answered that so that the general public knew that there is communication between departments so that if one can help out the other in case of anything happening. So
Absolutely.
do not hesitate to call. And I think one thing, if I may, if somebody calls and says, you know what, I've got some sort of a medical or anything, it might be a good idea for them to say, you know what, I'm not shoveled out. When they call the dispatcher and say 911, I says, you know, this is what I have for a problem, and I'm not shoveled out. Just to give them an idea, give them a heads up ahead of time.
Yeah,
just a little bit more information.
Yeah, and that has happened. We have had that information. Again, it depends on, usually it depends on the emergency and the severity of it as to whether or not that information, the mindset of a caller, passes that on.
Yep.
But we have received that information en route. But regardless, we have the resources, and we will 100%, we will get to you one way or another, whether we got to hike it in or not, we will get to that.
Appreciate that. Has anybody else got any other questions? Okay. I thank you very much. Oh, yes. Mr. Quayle, please.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add, during every snowstorm, working every storm, we listen to the radios, as the fire chief indicated, and we will dispatch a plow truck. Every time there's an emergency to any location, I immediately contact the plow on that route to make sure if they haven't been in that area recently, that they get right over there and plow that road, and we try to get there in front of the ambulance and get the road cleared. So, as the chief mentioned, we work together. They'll dispatch us, and if there's any issues on the roads that we see, we notify police. So there's constant communication, and we make sure that we can get through any snowstorm to get emergency access to those residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, has anybody got anything else? Thank you so much for coming in and explaining that to us, because I think you've kind of put a little bit more ease in the residents now with the phone calls and the bad weather.
Very good.
And be safe out there.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Chief.